Let's just begin with what he didn't say. He did not say there was going to be a naval battle in the Great Ocean with China. They're not the red adversary. We'll go over that quatrain. There's nothing in there about Pope Francis dying and being replaced this year. Could you imagine being Pope Francis and researching Nostradamus? I mean, like everybody does. And seeing all these pictures of yourself and these AI-related videos saying, you're going to die because you're too old. Well, that's not what the prophecy is about. And we'll go over that prophecy. It's about Pope Pius IX, the longest-running pope in Catholic history, accepting the original pope, St. Peter, who still sits on the throne, Peter the Rock. And Francis, if you believe in St. Malachi's prophecy, is Peter the Rock. And remember, that's St. Malachi's prophecy, not Nostradamus. So no, Nostradamus isn't wrong about a naval battle with China or Charles dying and Harry becoming the king. Harry is not going to become the king. The prophecy supposedly calls for someone with no mark of a king to become the king. That prophecy, as I've said before, is about his mother, Queen Elizabeth, succeeding to the throne after her father dies. Even though the former King Edward is still alive, the quatrain is not about Harry. He has the mark of a king. He has balls. He's arrogant. He's full of arrogant balls. He has the mark of a king. And Charles isn't going anywhere just yet. And leave Kate out of this. Could you imagine being Kate and searching Nostradamus like everybody does? And seeing all this mischief about yourself? And your friends calling you up and saying, oh my God, Kate, you're dying because Nostradamus says you're dying, so you're dying, right? Her saying, I have no idea how Nostradamus, and I guarantee you it's because Nostradamus didn't say that. Nostradamus didn't say anything about a sleep pandemic or about a 79-year period between World War II and World War III. That's some made-up falsadamus. They throw a bunch of stuff at you that's just not true, such as prophecies about dogs or cats, or your zodiac sign, bringing you fast cash. Nostradamus doesn't have quatrains about any of those things. And please don't do any harm or ill will to your pets because of some phony falsadamus prophecy. Be nice to your pets. They're your mates in the universe. I mean, let's face it, we don't really know if there's any life in the universe. So this is the only other life in the universe. I mean, respect it, okay? Even though I'd like to give him credit for it, Nostradamus did not predict an earthquake January 1st this year in Japan. That's also some stuff that they just sort of jumped on to get you to watch and say, wow, this Nostradamus is real. But I regret to inform you there is no alien encounter in the Nostradamus prophecies for this year. There is one near the end of the Chinese prophecy, Tuibei 2. It's just like last year or the year before, where they said Charles was going to give up the throne, and a comet was going to hit the castle, and the light was going to go out, Mars was going to blow up, and Elon couldn't go to Mars, and there was going to be 7 months of world war. Well, that prophecy is about a horrible 7 months of great war. The first war of religion in France in 1562. Yeah, serious stuff if you're Nostradamus trying to talk to his children, because he actually lived through it, and it was hectic. And he prophesied it in 1555. It was 7 years later. So there are many prophecies that came true while he was still alive, and especially while his children were alive. But it makes you wonder if they do this just to eventually say, see, Nostradamus was wrong. And yet they missed many quatrains that did happen in 2023. Things that happened in the war in Ukraine. The multitude of protests in France. I swear I watched one go off during the tear gassing of multiple cities all at once. We'll get to that. But they also missed things that happened in Israel and other markers of time, such as the death of Silvio Berlusconi on the 12th of June, 2023, the night, and it's mentioned in the quatrain, the night is gone. But the real question is, why would they put these things out? Unless to ask later, was Nostradamus wrong? Just like many critics who came out at the end of the year and said, see, there was no 7 months world war. Nostradamus was wrong. And now the Economic Times asks the question, is Nostradamus wrong about a naval battle with China in the Great Ocean? Well, the Great Ocean is the Atlantic Ocean, and we'll go over that. Is Nostradamus wrong about the Pope dying? Nostradamus never said anything about Pope Francis dying this year. But what's really sad is so many content creators just put out these prophecies as if Nostradamus really did predict them. They didn't look into them. They didn't try to solve these quatrains themselves. They just took what they read online and they read it to you in their podcast or their video. It seems anyone who quoted these prophecies in their content never really read Nostradamus's Prophecies and is not familiar with how Nostradamus makes prophecies, not predictions. He makes some predictions, and I'll point those out. One of them is the famous quatrain 1072 that now you're hearing about over and over again. They call it the King of Terror quatrain. And Nostradamus never said there was going to be a world war in 1999. Orson Welles said that. And people didn't seem to realize that Orson Welles was just bookending his career with War of the Worlds and The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, both stories of world destruction. You see, that was his personal touch. He put the feather in his own cap. Why people didn't pick up on that, I don't know. But Nostradamus never said it was going to be a world war in 1999. And that's the biggest critique you hear from all these people. Nostradamus is an idiot. You know, he said there was going to be a world war in 1999. That never happened, because Nostradamus didn't say that. We'll talk about the earthquake that was predicted for May 20th in Los Angeles, and why that never happened. Because Nostradamus didn't say that. That quatrain is about an earthquake that happened in northern Italy in 2012, and we'll go over that quatrain as well. But let me assure you that there are no dragons in lay prophecies, white dragons, red dragons, or otherwise, and the year of the dragon had nothing to do with the predictions and prophecies from lay prophecies. Because China has its own set of prophecies, especially with Tui Bei Tu, the prophetic work of 60 poems that tells China's history up till the end. And there, towards the end, there's a poem where everyone is grateful. Everyone is saved. Hooray for the 3-foot man. Now that might be an alien encounter. I don't know. I won't be around for that one. And there seems to be a heavy Indian influence in all of the current Nostradamus content, because it goes on about a world leader coming from India. They use the quatrain about long awaited in Europe. It comes from the East. Now, I don't know if they've read the rest of that quatrain, but they don't want those things attached to their leader. So believe me when I tell you, don't use that quatrain. It says bad things. And what's that quatrain about? I'll give you a hint. What could be further east than the Philippines? But it's strange because India has a great many of their own ancient prophecies, like Kagabujandar, the time-traveling multi-universe guru, Agastya Muni, the wisest of the wisest, who knew the past, present, and future of all time, Nandiswa, the one who knows the timing of death of all living things. Pretty deep stuff. I don't think you need Nostradamus. So let's look at the quatrain that had everybody worked up about a combat and naval battle with China, the red adversary. Ooh, how loose and vague is that? Listen, the quatrains aren't that vague, as you'll see right here. It's quatrain 3-1. Let's take a look at it. I'll read you the version that they've been reading to you. After combat and naval battle, the great Neptune in his highest belfry, red adversary, will become pale with fear, putting the great ocean in dread. Now, this quatrain is a great teaching quatrain, so I'm really glad they picked it, because the first word of the first line, from after combat and naval battle, and I'll read it to you in the French, it's après combat and battle naval. The first word, après, it means after. It's in capital letters. Whenever you see a word in capital letters, it's a big deal, because it's an anagram. By solving the anagram, you can actually get what the warning of the quatrain, the prophecy, is actually about. So if you do try to figure this out in advance, now let's say you were the red adversary, and you figured out, hey, wait a minute, that's about me, and you saw, après, A-P-R-E-S. Wait a minute, that can only be so many words. You want to go with French at first. Maybe Latin, if there's a Latin reference, a Roman reference in the quatrain. Is there? I'm afraid there is. Neptune, the dreaded Roman god of the sea, who would bring up storms and waves and swallow your boat. who caused many a Roman sailor to not return from their time at sea. So who would be the Grand Neptune in his highest belfry? Well, Nostradamus doesn't go far. Neptune would be Lord Horatio Nelson, the dread of every French sailor from 1798 on. This quatrain is about the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Why the Battle of Trafalgar? Because it was the last great battle under sail. It was also the defining moment for Napoleon when he realized he wasn't going to invade England and he was going to focus on the continent. It turned the tides of war. It sealed Lord Horatio Nelson's legacy as one of the greatest British commanders of all time and one of the greatest British heroes of all time. Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, 1st Viscount Nelson, was born the 18th of September, 1758. He was a British flag officer in the Royal Navy, and his victory at the Battle of Trafalgar reaffirmed British naval supremacy worldwide. So Neptune is in his highest belfry. The actual word here in French is beffroi. Now what's a beffroi? I'm going to go to the Old French, and to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and to Oxford's dictionary, because I don't want you to take my word for this. The word belfry that you're reading in this translation from Big Al, the word belfry does not come from the word bell. Earlier belfries did not contain bells at all. Belfry comes from the Middle English term beffray. Here in the Old French, Nostradamus wrote beffroi, which translates to the Middle English berfray, a term for a wooden tower used in medieval sieges. You know, a siege tower, they actually started as little sheds, little teeny huts that they'd get in and they'd get under them and they'd walk them up. But they eventually went to 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories. These structures could be rolled up to a fortification wall, so the warriors hidden inside could storm the battlements. Over time, the term was applied to other types of shelters and towers, many of which had bells in them. This association of berfray with bell towers seems to have influenced the dissimulation of the first R in berfray to an L in Oxford's dictionary. They say it's a wooden tower, usually movable, used in the Middle Ages in besieging fortifications, intended to shelter the besiegers while operating against a fortification. But in its developed form, it's got everything they could put up at the top of it to make it a formidable engine of attack. And so what would Lord Horatio Nelson's highest belfry be? Well, that would be the HMS Victory, the best ship in the British Royal Navy with over 100 cannons. In addition, Lord Nelson had just been made the High Commander of the British Navy. He was in charge and he had the best ship they had, and he was attacking his adversary, the Red Adversary. He was king in country, he was for the royalty and for England. He was chasing his adversary of the last 8 years, the Red Adversary, the revolutionary commander of Napoleon's navy, Charles-Pierre Villeneuve. Villeneuve had cast aside his nobility early on in the French Revolution and was dedicated to Napoleon. This makes him a Red. In the Prophecies of Nostradamus, Reds represent revolution, anti-establishment new government, and sometimes anarchy. Charles-Pierre Villeneuve had lost the Battle of the Nile to Lord Horatio Nelson back in 1798, and Lord Horatio Nelson had been chasing him around ever since, even as far as the West Indies to the British colonies, and then back to the Mediterranean. And this is what was making the Red Adversary pale with fear, because what he was afraid of, he didn't have the best sailors in the world. This was smack in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, and many of the old class of officers had been replaced or killed or run out by Napoleon, and not fully replaced with talented sailors. In addition, Villeneuve and his entire fleet had been trapped in port several times over the years by the British Navy, so he couldn't get more experience to the men he had. And so while the Battle of Trafalgar is a long story, it came down to technique. In those days, the ships all got into one line, and they sailed past each other, and they just shot at each other, and they tried to board each other's boat. It was simple, and in a straight line. The flagship in the middle could signal back and forth to the other ships. Nelson decided he was going to come at this line and drive right into it sideways, and by splitting his fleet into 2 separate lines. He was outnumbered, 27 large ships to 31 ships on the Allied French and Spanish fleet. The British Navy had 17,000 men. The French and Spanish Allied fleet had over 30,000 men. And Admiral Villeneuve had the idea of breaking his line into 3 separate lines because he was suspicious that Nelson would try something unconventional. But at the last minute, he changed his mind, and they did sort of a back and forth. Where they left port, they went out into the Atlantic Ocean, which is the Great Ocean. If you look at the old Roman maps, and you're looking for the Great Ocean, what's the Great Ocean? When in doubt, when in Rome? The Great Ocean is the Atlantic Ocean past the Straits of Gibraltar and the Pillar of Hercules. Outside of that is the Great Ocean. Everything in the Mediterranean are seas. Cape Trafalgar is west of the Straits of Gibraltar, along the coast of Spain facing the Great Ocean. Villeneuve had left the port of Cadiz and had his fleet out in the Atlantic Ocean and was trying to break his fleet up into these 3 lines. When he found out that Nelson's navy was bearing down on him from the north, he decided to turn around and go back to the port in Cadiz. This mixed up all the order of the ships, and they had a hard time getting back at one line. Here's what you'll read if you research this in the history books, that Admiral Villeneuve himself expressed his belief that Nelson would use some sort of unorthodox attack, speculating that Nelson would drive from right at his line. But his long game of cat and mouse with Nelson had worn him down, and he was suffering from a loss of nerve. Fearing that his inexperienced officers would be unable to maintain formation in more than one group, he chose to keep the single line that became Nelson's target. You see, if he had not gone through that indecision and fear about having confidence in his own men, and kept those 3 lines, he could have surrounded Nelson's British Navy and probably won, thus changing the fate of history in the map of Europe. So the Red Adversary became pale with fear for more reasons than one, because it put the Great Ocean in dread. The line in the quatrain actually says, causing or putting the Great Ocean in terror. So you could say, causing terror in the Great Ocean. Well, that battle was ugly, and many men lost their lives. 7,000 on the French and Spanish Allied sides, 1,800 on the British side. The French and Spanish lost 21 ships. The British lost none. Lord Horatio Nelson was killed in battle by a marksman with a musket in the rigging of the Redoubtable on the French side. But it's the Red Adversary, Charles-Pierre Villeneuve, who was captured, taken to England, and tried. 8,000 of the French and Spanish sailors were captured and taken prisoner. So, what about that anagram at the beginning? A prey. Well, Nostradamus doesn't make the anagrams hard. Look at the word apres. A-P-R-E-S. Take the A from the beginning of the word and put it on the end of the word, and you have the word presa, which means a capture, a seizure, a prize, or the taking. You see, it was a warning to Villeneuve. Don't forget, Nostradamus was French, and as much as he hated Napoleon, he fell for the many men who had no choice but to be in those navies. In most cases, they were seized. So yes, Nostradamus was looking out for them by warning Villeneuve that you're about to be taken prisoner, you're about to be captured, and your boats and your booty, well, that's now going to be their prize. Presa. The anagram is always a huge clue that you actually have solved the right subject for the quatrain. So in conclusion, China does not have to worry about a naval battle confrontation with anybody in their Great Ocean. The next quatrain they give you in this list of supposed predictions by Nostradamus for 2024 is Quatrain 556, and it is not about the death of Pope Francis. It is actually about the death of Pope Gregory XVI and the subsequent election of Pope Pius IX, who became the longest-serving pope in Catholic history. Except for, of course, St. Peter, who still sits there, because Francis is Peter the Rock. If you believe in St. Malachi's prophecy, then Francis is Peter the Rock. So let's take a look at Nostradamus' prophecy. This is the one they're reading to you. Through the death of the very old pontiff, a Roman of good age will be elected. Of him it will be said that he weakens his see, but long will he sit, and in biting activity. Biting activity, a long sea. Who's elected after the death of a very old pontiff? Pope Gregory XVI was 80 years old when he died in 1846. which was very old for a man at the time. Most men didn't even live into their 70s. Pope Pius IX was born Giovanni Maria Mastai Ferretti on the 13th of May, 1792. He was 54 years old when he was elected pope, a good age for a pope. He was and had been a Roman, but it's his reign of 32 years that is the longest of any pope in history. So how he weakened his see was that he was the leader of the Papal States, a very large empire, and he slowly lost it because he wasn't willing to go with the times. Right after he was elected in 1848 was the year of revolutions, and it went on from there. By 1868, he had become quite powerless, but he convoked the First Vatican Council, in which he declared ultimate supremacy and that he was infallible, which unfortunately everybody there had to go along with. By 1870, he had completely lost the Papal States to the Italian Revolutionary Army, which included all of Rome. All that they were left with was the Vatican, which he locked himself up in and declared himself a prisoner of the Vatican. And then he went on to stay in the Vatican for 8 more years and wouldn't leave. So in review, through the death of the very old pontiff, Pope Gregory XVI, a Roman of good age will be elected and become Pius IX. Of him it will be said that he weakens. He loses all power of the Papal States. But long will he sit, 32 years, the longest in papal history, and in biting activity. Pope Pius IX had epilepsy. He had struggled with it as a child and early on in his priesthood. But his mentor, Pius VII, took a liking to him, and so they put time into him because he wanted to be able to say Mass on his own. Pope Pius IX controlled his epileptic seizures by biting his tongue. By biting his tongue doesn't seem so cryptic or vague after all. You just have to try to solve it, and if it still seems cryptic and vague, you haven't solved it. If it's close or this or that, you haven't solved it. Probably because Nostradamus didn't say that, and Nostradamus never said there was going to be an earthquake in California on May 20th. Who knows, maybe they'll bring it back for next year. This quatrain, 983, mentions a theater that gets ruined after a shaking of the ground. This quatrain is about the May 20th, 2012 earthquake in the Emilia-Romagna region of northern Italy. You will find, as you learn more about the quatrains, that Nostradamus spent quite a bit of time there. It was his other stomping grounds. And we will slowly unravel the mystery as to why. And this fills in a lot of the gaps of the story of Michel de Nostradame. Here's the quatrain as they read it to you. Sun 20th of Taurus. The earth will tremble very mightily. It will ruin the great theater filled to darken and trouble air, sky, and land. Then the infidel will call upon God and the saints. So the prediction was that for this year, there would be an earthquake May 20th in Los Angeles, because the quatrain mentions the theater being ruined. This earthquake first hit at 4 a.m. in the Emilia-Romagna region of northern Italy. The quake devastated the region, and there was a lot of damage to extremely historic and irreplaceable buildings, churches, palaces, fortresses, castles, town halls. The main quake struck at 4 in the morning, but then there was an equally powerful aftershock at 3 in the afternoon. After the first main quake at 4 a.m., people all ran out into the streets. They panicked, they cried, they screamed. They called out to God and saints, praying for this to end, because the shaking kept going. There were aftershocks all night and people lined the streets. Many people walked up and down. Many people just sat outside wherever they could find a space, but they wouldn't go back into their houses. Many of the buildings came apart because they were built with small stones that were either held together with mortar, and there is historically a lack of caves in the area to supply this type of mortar in the Emilia-Romagna region. So in other words, medieval structures that weren't even the best constructed medieval structures, and they were coming down. There was a lot of dust and debris in the air. Like the quatrain says, it was troubled. Right in the middle of Finale, Emilia, there's an old medieval theater, and it had been converted to a cinema, and they were showing a film to calm people down, to get them in the theater, calm them down, and then when the aftershock came, At 3 p.m., the wall of the theater caved in and everybody had to run out of there. But I don't think that's the theater mentioned. I think the theater mentioned here would be the cathedral at St. Carlo. The destruction was far and wide all over northern Italy because this had been the worst earthquake since 1346. But it wasn't just limited to historical buildings. There were a lot of industrial buildings that got destroyed with people in them. There were 7 deaths that night, 30 deaths that week, because the tremors kept going. After 2 months, there had been 1,600 tremors. And you could see in all of the media and the blogs, people were leaving the area, they had PTSD, they wanted it to stop. They were constantly afraid that these quakes had been the precursor and that any minute was going to be the big one. If you read many of the stories still online about the situation, you'll see that people talked about hiding under the bed and praying to the gods while the quake was going on, and then months later, just cursing the whole situation and wanting to get out of there. Because the aftershocks didn't end until after 3.5 months. Sun 20th of Taurus is where the sun will be May 20th. May 20th is the last day of the sun sign Taurus. Taurus 30 would be April 30. Taurus 6 would be May 6th. Taurus, the 20th, is May the 20th. So this quatrain prophesied an earthquake on May 20th. Now the Grand Theater once filled, not just filled, but the word is given in the past participle, which means once filled. So once filled talks about a place that had grandeur, that maybe was filled when Nostradamus was there. That would be the medieval chapel at San Carlo, a small village right outside Finale Emilia, the epicenter of the earthquakes. The cathedral at San Carlo came from medieval times and was active during Nostradamus' day. It had fallen into disrepair, but had just gone through an 8-year renovation, which had been talked about online and in the media. There was a GoFundMe campaign, and it was restored to its highest elegance, turned into a concert hall and theater. This earthquake brought the ceiling in and completely ruined the place after it had just been redone and reopened. It had been a symbol of pride for the locals, and its ruin dealt a real psychological blow to the community. The cathedral was built in the 15th century, and it was ruined on May 20th, 2012. Now you have to remember, Nostradamus had walked through all these places in his travels. So nothing like this has happened to this region since well before his time, 1346, up till when this prophecy was realized on May 20th, 2012. Now, if Nostradamus had said in the Prophecies, there's going to be an earthquake in Italy in 2012, everybody would have thought it was going to be something huge and catastrophic in the end of the world, especially the way people were talking in 2012. Nostradamus knew this. There's actually a quatrain about 2012 turning into 2013. Nostradamus refers to the Mayan calendar as the great mover of time. Because if you understand the Mayan calendar, you understand that the calendar works with geared wheels. It teaches mechanisms, and the Mayans didn't even have the wheel, and they cut hearts out to make it rain. You must realize the Mayan calendar wasn't written by the Mayans, and that it was probably conceived and made some 27,000 years before the rise of the Mayans. Then there's a quatrain they go over that they say is thought to be about AI. Quatrain 431. Let's take a look at it. The moon in the full of night over the high mountain. The new sage with a lone brain sees it. By his disciples invited to be immortal. Eyes to the south, hands in bosoms, bodies in the fire. I don't know, and everybody's excited about AI, but it's not just Aristotle, it's also Pandora. Prometheus is the name of a new AI chatbot. Prometheus was the Greek god who gave people fire, who Zeus got so mad at because he considered it a technology that they weren't ready for, because he felt they would use it to fight each other and burn things down. I think this quatrain is about something else. I think it is about a mountain that stores ceramic tiles for when all the power goes out. This quatrain suggests a few things. When it says the new sage with a lone brain sees it, that could also say the new sage of one mind has seen it, summoned to be immortal by his disciples. eyes at midday. See, it doesn't really say eyes to the south. It says to midi, which means the middle. Because when you look up at the sky in France during the middle of the day or at noontime, ever so slightly to the south is the sun. It's never right in the middle of the sky. It leans a little to the south. So at noon, you always know which way south is. So south was also referred to as the middle, the midpoint, because of the middle of the day. And so eventually the term le midi was synonymous with the south of France, west to the Spanish coast, and east, including Corsica. But here, it could also be the middle. That line could say, eyes at the middle, hands at breasts and bosom, body in the fire. Now Nostradamus talks about the light that comes from your tablet or your screen as the slight flame. And remember, that light can be measured in foot candles. And so when you think, eyes towards the middle, hands and bosoms, that's what people look like walking around with their phone. Their eyes really look like they're looking at the middle of the next person, but they're not. They're looking at the phone. Their hands are up around their bosoms. And if their bodies are actually in the fire, then he's describing what he sees as the metaverse. Something to think about. It's more important to realize that these quatrains are vague. Or really what he says, obscured, which means they have hidden things in them. And that is because there are many obscured quatrains, and there are some written in prose. The ones that are just written in prose are the ones that combine to tell you what the book is actually about. Whereas the vast majority are vague ones meant to prove that he knew about all of these separate news stories that occurred over hundreds of years. So you wonder, how did he get all that? Well, he's telling you, I read your news. And your main news story is about this huge event that will happen soon in your future history. And what perhaps would start that? What would start all this doom that you see about destruction and starvation? Well, you might not believe in climate change, but your insurance company does. So when it's too expensive to insure properties, those properties no longer qualify for a mortgage, which means the mortgage that's out on the property becomes under threat of not being paid by the owner, who has to decide, am I going to take the loss or am I going to walk on the mortgage? This begins an economic collapse. You combine the weather and the destruction, and the point is you need leaders that understand all this. To deal with climate change would take a massive international effort. The only group or organization prepared for something that large, that at scale, is big energy. So while it seems counterintuitive, you need big energy now to get you out of what big energy has brought on. Because you want to move vast quantities of water from where it falls or melts to where you need it for growing crops, for people and animals, as well as for replenishing major aquifers. In addition, the excess carbon dioxide has to be removed from the atmosphere before you reduce emissions. In our current situation, the pollution particles are actually helping to shield the Earth from additional heating through aerosol masking. If they were to fall away suddenly before removing the 50% excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the Earth would get 25% hotter in just weeks. Think about what happens when your body temperature rises just 2 degrees Celsius. That means you are running a fever at 102 Fahrenheit. Think about what will happen to your body if that continues. The Earth is going through that now. 2024 was the hottest year on record, after the previous 9 hottest years up till this year. Who could have predicted that? Nostradamus, in Quatrain 117. But I'll go over that in a video about the predictions for 2025 that just came out. And let me just start with, Nostradamus didn't say that. I assure you, Nostradamus did not make a prediction about a large asteroid coming close to or hitting the Earth in 2025. However, they have brought up a quatrain that has vexed me for some time, because I cannot put a date on it yet. I hope it is not for this year, because I believe it is a prophecy about an eruption within the Campi Flegrei caldera, which sits just below the Garden of the World near the new city. I am Michael Facco, and this is Understand Nostradamus. Please subscribe to the channel and let me help you to understand the great importance of the message for the future of mankind that Nostradamus reveals. Remember, hope requires hard work and a plan, or it's just a wish. And thanks for watching.